All right. Well, hello, Let's Play community. I'm Kristen Kalina, the founder of Mastermind Adventures. This is my friend Sunny Moriello Flats, and she is coming to talk with us today. I'll give you a little bit about her background. She's going to be able to explain it better, as usual, than I can. She is a youth champion who has worked with kids for over 20 years, and she is right now focusing on introverted creators looking to inspire social change through their work. So I thought, and she's done a ton of other things, which we'll go through today.
Right.
This is what she's focused on right now. But I met Sunny probably
4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. Because Mastermind had just started kind of becoming a thing. And we met kind of through the homeschool community.
Yep.
And then we didn't see each other for years.
Right.
And then suddenly she was in my shop and I was like, I think I know this person.
Right.
But I have this problem where I think I know people a lot. So I've learned not to always go, hey, because oftentimes they don't know who I am.
It happens.
I get people confused on the regular. So yeah, it's kind of a bad habit of mine. But anyway, so we'll get into some of the other stuff that she's been into. But I thought she would be great to talk to the community because of her vast knowledge in how to work with kids, how to get kids to engage. Unstructured play was a big part of her background. I'm sure we'll talk about. But this is Sunny. Well, welcome to
Thank you very
Let's
much for
Play
having me.
community.
I'm very excited about it.
I am so excited to chat with you. Yeah, because you were like at the top of my list when I started making lists of people that I wanted to talk with. I was like, I gotta get Sunny to come. Yeah. So
Perfect.
yeah. So
Awesome.
I so appreciate it.
No problem.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you a little bit about what I've done because, like you said, I've been doing youth work for about 20 years, and that, of course, started, really pre-20 years ago as a camp counselor, where we did fun stuff, but youth development wasn't a thing to the best of my knowledge. And then I went and got a real job after college. And then I decided, no, this is not what I want to be doing. And I took a part-time job at a housing site through the Boys and Girls Club, and it was magical for me. It really transformed how I looked at kids and how I looked at the experience that kids were having.
Yeah.
And over time, that's really changed how I view the experience that kids are having. Has changed a lot. I started out with really solid lesson plans, and I knew what I was going to do, and I knew what they were going to get out of it, and everybody was going to be quiet. I'm glad you're laughing. I once had 160 kids in a room. 160.
Oh my
And I said,
gosh.
I'll wait till you're ready.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I went home that night and was like, I
What
will
happened?
never do that again. It was like the moment as a parent where you're like, I gave an ultimatum and now I have to live with it, and that was a terrible idea. But part of it is I learned through doing, and I had the wonderful opportunity of working throughout Pawtucket, Providence, East Providence with ranges of kids, from kids that were coming, from kindergarten, all the way to when I was working with an outreach project to kids that were in the detention center who were actually, over 18, so they weren't technically kids, but they were. So I've had this huge opportunity to work with kids in all different settings, and I just found that oh wow, there are these core things that are the same, and I've gone from planning those really structured lesson plans to really walking into a room and seeing who's there and seeing what personalities show up, and having an opportunity to then say, okay, we're going to take on this challenge, whatever that challenge may be it we're building forts or we're building poems, right? The medium doesn't really matter. And it's really been a great journey for me, and it's also helped me parent, because as you know, I have a lovely 12-year-old.
She is, she really is. No.
She really has so much personality.
She really is great, yeah.
So much, and she's really taught me how to be a better youth development, professional, and really taught me to expand my thinking, and so I'm really grateful for that. But I'm glad to be able to talk to everybody today about one of my favorite subjects, which is unstructured play.
Yeah. So talk about that. I know we talked a little bit offline beforehand. So Sunny, when I met her, she ran a business called Soul Happy Living, and it was all focused around young children and unstructured play.
It was.
So talk more about that. What was that like?
Yeah.
And what was your motivations behind that? What did you learn?
A lot, yeah, a lot.
There's a lot of questions,
right?
There.
Yeah, there were. I had some experience, like I said, working with the Boys and Girls Clubs, which were some more structured programming with some unstructured things going on in it. And then I went into some youth work with substance abuse prevention. And that was really different. And then when I came out of that and started homeschooling, which was a complete accident, by the way. Just want those of you that maybe have ever considered it to know it was a complete accident. Yeah. We went away to Barbados, where we have family. And I was like, well, putting her in school, pulling her from school, this is all very silly. And we had a very unstructured year. And that unstructured year changed my thinking about lessons, about opportunities, about how to send messages, and that's really where I started. The Soul Happy Living idea really came into play. And so what I started doing was going and getting found objects, recycled items. There's a great recycling center in Rhode Island, in Providence, that has like all the baubles from a factory, right? Or like 1,000 pieces of string, right? So I'd go with my garbage bag and I'd collect all this really cool stuff that I didn't know necessarily how it would go together, and then I would put it out, and I would say, today we're going to create, the most fascinating world we have ever created. And kids would be like, well, what do you mean? What's the outcome? Do I have to build a fort? Does it have to be this? Does it have to be that? And like really their anxiety around the idea of creating something that didn't have a specific goal, but had a general outline to it was really interesting to me.
Yes, I've experienced that too.
Yeah, right? Like, tell me what you want me to make and I will make it. And I was like, no, I want you to create whatever's in your mind. And so that's how it started. It really was like, oh, okay. And what they made, and I know you've experienced this, was awesome. Yeah. Like, it was so amazing. Like, things that if I had told them to build a fort, I never would have seen, right? There were dwarf villages and, fairy gardens. And one kid happened to be studying Greek mythology at the time and made this enormous replica of what a particular temple looked like to him. But what's the magic of it all? I mean, it's magical to watch it happen, but it's also magical. At the end, I always ask them, tell us a little bit about what you created. And so we each, like, if I'm using big blocks, which we do sometimes, like they're, 3 feet by 4 feet, and like they're making huge structures, we walk around. But if they're smaller structures, we might sit in a circle, and each person gets an opportunity to explain what their creation is, what's going on in their mind that we can't see when we look at all these bobbins and baubles and boxes and strings, and that's the magic.
Right.
It's this one kid spending an hour really diligently working on that one project, and then saying to us all, I've been reading about Greek mythology, and this is God's temple, and if you look over here, that's where the armory is, and if and you'd see like all these little toothpicks lined up, that he had spears, and then this area here is where they meet together to make decisions, and there was an entire world built into that one little thing, and I was like, this is all I ever want to do with kids.
Yes.
Ever again. I want them to like tell me the story of what's really deeply important to them. And so I've just used lots of different mediums to do that since then. And sometimes they're still baubles, but sometimes they're poems and words. And I just recently had the really wonderful opportunity in our homeschool co-op to run a program where we worked collaboratively to decide things that were important to us in our community. And then we decided how we could make that into a full-scale mural. And then we used all of our small inspirations to create mosaic pieces that then created the entire mural.
Holy crap.
And we and I don't know that like it ended up way more beautiful than I ever could have written down on paper when I wrote the lesson plan, because it was what the kids brought to the experience and their real commitment to it, because they owned it, right? And we were very fortunate to be able to display it at the Warwick Library.
Oh, wow.
And it was like a 6-foot by 3-foot beautiful structure with sand, and there were seashells, and each of the seashells had their commitment to their own community. And then they had a dolphin that they made, and the ocean, and then the sky. It was really
goodness.
It was beyond my comprehension when I showed up with the magazines for them to rip up and a few ideas, right?
Yeah.
So,
wow.
I'm continuously surprised by what can happen when you
Yes.
give kids some open-ended opportunities.
Right. Wow. I want to go see it. Is it still there?
It's not still there. I'll send you pictures.
I would love to see
It's
pictures.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you because you're doing different kinds of programming right now.
I am. Yeah.
And you said you're working on a book.
I am working on a book.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as a white mother with a black daughter, that presents certain challenges, and I realized that I was doing work with my own daughter around race and identity here in America. And also, we have the opportunity to go to Barbados, so I see a very different culture there, because it's a predominantly black culture, from the prime minister, woman prime minister, all the way down. And so seeing that disparity really made me realize that, like, there is a conversation that has to happen with white parents of children of color around what are we doing to reduce our own internal, racism? And, I'm not saying that outwardly anybody who has a child of color is like being a racist in the ways that we think about racism.
Right.
But how does the structure of our government and our society put things innately in our being that we don't even realize we're imposing on our children?
Right.
And what's our responsibility to really create a society where our kids, who are children of color, are valued and loved and have the opportunity to do every single thing that those of us who have white privilege can do, right? Because that should be a fundamental thing. So yeah, it's a little bit of a departure from my original writing, which has been poetry, which I still thoroughly enjoy, but this is sort of my passion project at the moment.
Yeah, I would say.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it.
It's such an important subject to explore.
It is, and
Um,
it's scary as
it-
well,
yeah.
like to do the work, right? Like, there's definitely been times that I've been reading or writing that I'm like, okay, I learned something today. How am I going to apply that to my parenting tomorrow?
Right.
But I want to be able to, like, sort of package that experience for other parents and help them work through that.
Yeah. Because there's so much, I think, growing up as a white person in America, which is my only experience, obviously,
Right.
that you don't think about, that you don't have to really realize. And then, the more that you expand your circle and your circle becomes more diverse, I think that helps to open up your mind. But then having a child who
Right. And then
is
how are you advocating?
dealing with
Mm-hmm.
all of what society has right
Right.
now.
Right? Yeah.
Which is so powerful as even as a white adult trying to deal with it. I get overwhelmed. I
Right.
can't even imagine
Yeah.
children, and then trying to parent that.
Right. And her
Make
her
space for that.
experience will always be different
Different.
from my experience.
Right.
And just really making sure that I'm doing my very best to help her find her voice, but also speak to the experience that she is having and is going to have. And also, like, being actively involved in dismantling a system that's
Yes.
unfair to not only my child, but to other people's children, right? So, like, making sure I'm doing my work so that I know that I've done very best by her.
Right.
So,
Because we all have that work to do.
yeah, we do.
We all have it.
We all do. We all
have-
do, no matter what we
constantly,
think. Yeah.
Constantly that kind of, checking our mindset and checking our understanding and checking our our privilege, and you know,
Yeah.
I had this conversation with somebody else yesterday. I'm not going to get into it right now,
Right.
but yeah, like I had an experience, you know, recently where I was just like, oh, Kristen,
right? But that's good,
and it is good.
Right?
It is
That's
good, and it's only because of things that have come before, and relationships and friendships that I've had,
Right.
that I'm able to even, you know, see those things
See
in
it,
myself. Go,
right.
oh, that wasn't the
Right.
best, you know, or even just, oh, I should have thought about this differently. I was only thinking from one perspective, you
Right.
know, because it's just a constant thing. So
Yeah,
I think
it
that's
is.
great. So when do you think that your opus?
I am diligently working. I hope by next summer
Okay.
it will be complete. We
Yeah.
have a long trip to Barbados this winter. I'm not a winter person. Sorry,
Yeah,
everybody
yeah,
that
yeah.
loves that snow, but I am not about it. So I'm
You're not looking forward to
no,
this.
I'm
3
so
months of
looking
blizzard?
to palm trees and beaches,
Yeah.
no doubt. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping during that period of time I'll really get some large chunks of it done.
Yeah.
But because I am doing my own work
Mhm.
during this, and parenting and writing,
Mhm.
and doing poetry, you know, and still working with kids, there's lots of things going on. So,
Right.
you know, yeah, I'm hoping
Yeah.
by next summer that
All
will
right,
be
well, stay
real
tuned,
thing.
community,
Now that I've
yeah.
committed.
Yeah, yeah. Now
Right?
that it's there,
Now that everybody
yeah.
knows that, right?
Yeah, no, I
Perfect.
think that's so needed and so fantastic.
Thank you.
So, so talk a little bit more about like your work, the work you're doing now.
Mhm.
What are the goals and missions that you have or keeping in mind as you do your programs for kids that you're developing? The things that
Yeah. So this is one thing that's really shifted from when I began. Like I said, I used to start with that really solid lesson plan, and now I start with like, what experience do I want kids to have? Do I want them to be able to talk more? Do I want them to actively engage with others? Do I want them to self-reflect? And sometimes the answer is I'd like them to do all of those things. But I usually try to focus in on one, you know, what we call social emotional development skills,
Yeah.
right? So if you're not familiar with that, there's plenty online. That's how I learned. I taught myself. There wasn't any magic course to teach social emotional development for youth workers. I wish there was. Maybe I need to build one. Things to put on my list, right?
Future
Always
goals.
adding to
Yes.
that list. But I really like try to focus on one thing I would like for that child to experience, and then I like try to pick a topic that I feel that I have some passionate about, or that I feel kids are super passionate about. Fort building has been a big thing for me.
Yeah.
And actually that came out of, I was doing some work with an amazing group that was doing expressive arts with kids. And I did a summer camp for a week. And, you know, I had all of the great plans of all the, you know, expressive arts projects we were going to do. And in the meantime, I was like, all right, well, great. I'm going to grab some boxes and like little, you know, when you get your refrigerator and there's like the pieces in it. And we have a shop in Providence that all those pieces are actually not styrofoam, but they're cardboard, which is really cool. And I used to like go over by the guy's shop like late at night and I'd be like wave to him in the window as I like filled the back of my trunk with them.
Wow.
And this particular group happened to get an enormous donation from duct tape.
Oh.
With the coolest duct tapes. You know, duct tape has like
Oh, yeah.
done it up, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
like we had like
It's another
pickle
level.
duct tape, we had bacon duct tape, we had tie-dye duct tape, everything. And my thought was, you know, there's always that window in a camp or a program where parents are dropping off. You know, some people are earlier, some people are later, depending on their schedule, or if like you're like me, your ability to actually get out of the house,
Yeah.
which doesn't always happen in the time frame that I think it's going to happen in. And so I made this window, and I just sort of like put the duct tape out and put the pieces of cardboard out, and they're like, "What are we supposed to build?" And I was like,
Up to you. Yeah.
by the end of the week, to take them away from that project in the morning to actually like, do the other things we were doing.
Yeah.
It was almost impossible. So then I was like, well, why am I fighting with this?
Yeah.
This is where they want to be creative. They built stores, and they had a movie theater that they created, that they actually like created they used a sheet and they taped it all up, and they would take a light and put it on the backside, and then they created shadow puppets
Oh my
so that
goodness.
the people who were on the inside of the structure could see the actual show on the TV screen. They made houses for themselves. So some kids like worked really individually. They wanted to do their project, but it was interesting because by the end of the week they were like, well, could I park my car over here by your movie theater? Like, it's still my project, but I do want to actually engage with you, even though when we started I wasn't comfortable with that. So that spurred my love of fort building, and there is something really wonderful about fort building in those younger years, but then also like that tween age, they do some amazing things with forts. So currently I'm using imagination playground blocks for fort building, which for those of you that don't know are these enormous blue blocks made like sort of like a foam block. And I've been fortunate enough to work in lots of places like the Providence Children's Museum or with the Boys and Girls Clubs that have them. And I'll have kids come in and I'll say, today you get 10 blocks. And you look at me like this. How am I supposed to work with 10 blocks? And then I'll say, well, and you can work out with up to 3 people, which now means you have 30 blocks.
Right.
Well, can I work with 4 people? Nope, just 3.
Right.
And like, so then those 3 kids swirl away in the corner and they negotiate and they discuss, and you know, sometimes one kid starts building and doesn't even talk to the other 2 kids, and then the other 2 kids are like, hey, what are you doing?
Right,
We were
right,
gonna
right.
do such and such. And that's where the magic happens, is like this negotiation
Yes.
and conversation. And I spend a lot of my time just walking around and saying, like, making observations, like, I see that you guys have a really tall structure. And they're like, yeah, it's a turret because we're going to put a thing on the top that, you know, is going to, you know, blow confetti into the sky. Like, I don't give them much. I just say, this is what I observe, you know. And then if they're having struggles negotiating things, I sort of, you know, I'm available.
Yeah.
You know, I hear you guys are struggling with that. Do you need some help?
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll say yes, and sometimes they want me to mind my business.
Yeah.
So I do my best to mind my business.
Yes, yeah. Right.
And they just build cool stuff.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, my real goal is that they have the opportunity to like build that social skill.
Mm-hmm.
The medium is all, right?
Yeah.
It could be anything.
Right.
But it's always lovely to see what stories they come up
Right.
with in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's so few places where they have time and space to explore those skills
Exactly.
without a specific outcome in mind.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Other than the social skill.
And
right?
I often think one of my biggest challenges is convincing parents that this is important, right? That what's happening there is really important. Like, parents will be like, oh, obviously I'm in a co-op, so you know, I have a fort building class, and somebody else is teaching, you know, history of the U.S. from, you know, the Revolutionary War to, you know, Reconstruction period. You know, in many times, you know, like any other environment, we have parents who, you know, really allow their kids to choose, and other parents who want to make choices with or for their children. And selling parents on the value of what happens in that fort building class
Right.
is really tricky.
Especially if they don't see that their child has a deficit in that area.
Right.
Yeah, there's so much pressure, I feel like, right now on kids to perform, right? To be, you know, the competition and performance and checking the boxes of what's required of them as in academics, even in homeschooling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, some of that is, you know, by design, right? We have to fulfill certain, we have to say
requirements. Yep, we did this.
We did this.
Right. But like, you know, when we're fort building, we talk about the engineering skills involved, and we talk about, you know, so there is, you know, lessons to be learned for sure, because it's that sort of STEM base or STEAM base, right? But on the other hand, there's really that opportunity to have the discussions and to work on your skills. And I doubt very highly that most of these kids go home and say, like, I learned how to negotiate whether or not to put a turret on my, like, they're just going to say to you, we had this awesome turret, it was amazing, right? But this other thing was happening. And like, sometimes I wish I could like have little birdies on my shoulder that were the parents, so that they could see what I get to see.
Right.
So it's nice to get to talk about it, because
it is, and
I don't always get to show
there's
it.
so much research that's showing that kids are losing these skills.
Absolutely.
And I know, I've got friends who've been in human resources who say kids coming out of college don't have these very important negotiation skills, compromise, any of that kind of social emotional stuff is just really lacking. And I read an article, we were getting ready for a thing that we did, but it basically said that kids, even neurotypical kids, are losing the ability to make eye contact.
Right.
Because they're on their phones, or they're, so it's so important that these opportunities are available to them to explore.
Yeah.
Right. And to learn the skills.
To learn those skills, yeah. And even if that skill is that, you're talking about, like, looking somebody in the eye, and, I had a kid in my program who really struggled with interaction, right? Like, that was his personal struggle. But I always give the opportunity to work alone. So he was like, I don't have to be in a group, do I? And I was like, and he breathed with me, and I was like, you can always work alone. Yeah. That's always an okay choice. But I am going to ask that you share with the rest of us. And by the end, he was really engaged in discussing, it was his project, he did it alone, but he wanted to talk to other kids about what he had created. And also, like, he was the best, like, block negotiator I had ever met in my entire life, and, like, kind and generous with his block negotiation. And I know that, like, there's a parent out there who's like, she's talking about block negotiation, but, like, it's really important. Like, I gave you 10 blocks. What if you didn't end up with the blocks you wanted? Then what do? Oh, I'm going to go to my neighbor and say, would you like this circular block? I really need it for my structure. And watching him work around that. So, like, no, he didn't work with 2 other people in his group, but yes, he worked with everybody. Actually, I don't think there was anybody in the class, I'm like looking around the class in my mind, that he did not negotiate the blocks that he needed with care and consideration for what they needed as well. And I was just like, win.
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
So when I go home and I'm like, yes, right?
Yeah, because even though we worked alone, he still got the same skills,
yeah, right. And those skills, like you said, and I have had the good fortune of working with some young people who have come out of school recently, and even those young people who have come out of school recently recognize the deficit that they have right now, especially as they enter into the working world. And many of them were, like, on the cusp of when sort of testing all started and, like, the structure of education changed. And they're relearning these skills, or learning them, I guess, to some degree, now as young adults.
Right.
So that's a real big need right now, and may continue to be for a while as we head forward.
Yeah, I don't see an end in sight.
Right.
This is the world we're in.
Right, exactly.
It just is. So we've kind of talked about some of the questions that I had already, but so when you're looking at, for parents who are out there and they're interested in, because not everybody's in this local area that's in our group, so if they're looking for their kids to be able to have this kind of experience and practice these kind of skills, what would you say to them is good things to look for in this type of either after school activity or homeschool activity or class or program or summer camp or whatever?
It's a really good question. I think that, look for opportunities that are, open-ended, so that, like, your kid gets an experience. So let's just say you see a class, a writing class. Does that writing class allow for them to have their own voice, or are they being required to write about a particular topic, right? So that's where your difference between highly structured and more open-ended, right? Likewise, if you were going to do, let's say they want to do an after-school program and you have several to pick from, you may look at the descriptions and say, oh, this board game one allows them the opportunity every day to pick what game they're going to play with, right? So it's not quite an unstructured opportunity in the sense that there's structure within the game, right? But there's opportunity to make decisions in a broader scope. And also, playground games. If the after-school program allows them to choose what game they're playing, that's an amazing opportunity for kids, which also obviously ticks off the running around, which is fantastic for them as well. I really love looking for opportunities for kids to be outside and to experience very open-ended opportunities, because nature's sort of your ultimate open-ended opportunity playground.
Right.
So great going to a place, that allows them to, maybe build a fort as they're going. So if you're choosing between, two hikes and you definitely want an open-ended opportunity, make sure you're hiking someplace that you can build a little fairy house, or build a fort, or make one of the things we did when I was at the Children's Museum is they made nature portraits. So they used leaves and twigs and burrs and all sorts of other fun things, but they made a self-portrait. Kids made self-portraits of it. Not every place that you hike is going to let you leave those sort of things behind. Sometimes they only want your footprints, which is totally understandable. But even the local park, and if you can't find them, I'm sure there are other people in your area who are looking for that too. Don't be afraid to say, hey, we're gonna meet out at this park that has tons of fall leaves or lots of twigs, or has great sticks that they can draw in the sand with, right? And just gather some people, make some community for yourself where your kids have these open-ended opportunities.
Yeah. So if somebody does want to either take their kids out and get started in this kind of thing, and they feel like, just overwhelmed, there's just so many different things we can do.
Yeah.
Is there a good resource that might give them inspiration, or just little suggestions of, hey, try this, hey, try that?
Yeah. I would definitely, obviously, our world is online, so definitely look, online, and open-ended, activities is kind of like your keyword there. And there are definitely, I'm trying to think of some of the names right now. They may come to me a little later.
Yeah.
There are definitely sites online that focus more on, being in nature. And then there are ones that focus more on, sort of this open-ended play. But if you're just trying to start, a really great opportunity, and I remember doing this with, Ava as a kid, was just get a lot of a thing. I know, and that's really unspecific, but it could be pom-poms, it could be Legos, it could be, and remember that Legos are an open-ended learning opportunity. You don't always have to make a kit, although your kid may tell you otherwise. With basil leaves when she was little, whatever the case may be, and just leave them someplace. Plastic cups. Plastic cups are amazing. So if you happen to have solo cups at your house, or you could get them recycled from a friend or a party, and wash them out and reuse them as playthings, they're fantastic. I've had kids build towers, and how I frame that is what's the tallest structure you can create? So leave things out, see what happens with them, and then if nothing happens with them, leave them out, and maybe leave a little challenge. Our family challenge of the day is to create the tallest item we can with this, or the widest item, depending on how big your house is. Mine it would be tall because it's small. Maybe for yours it would be wide. That's okay. But just leave a little challenge, and that challenge then with this really insignificant item is an opportunity. And the recycling bin is always an amazing place to start. So if all else fails, remember, they will play with pots and pans. And also don't be discouraged. I would say to a family that this is not a practice for. If your family doesn't normally practice this, remember that these practices take time. So if your kid gives you stink eye the first 3 times, it's okay. And sometimes we have to show kids what we're willing to do. So if you have that little challenge, and those, let's say the cups stay there for 2 days, nobody does anything with them. Day 3, I would build a thing, whatever the thing is, whatever magic comes to you, and then just leave it there. And there's something sort of about the not talking about it that really intrigues kids.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
They trip on it and they're
I'm
like,
not just kids, teenagers too.
Yeah.
You can't talk about it.
right? Yeah, don't talk to me about it, but it's there. And talk on the back end. The back end's the place to like discuss what happened, right? Like, oh, you got really, I see that you seemed very frustrated there, or like, how were you feeling when your tower fell down? Those are where we can build in those social skills.
Right.
But just, try to provide an opportunity where there isn't like the thing to do.
When I had my daycare, and my oldest was in kindergarten or first grade, I remember that I couldn't keep paper plates in the house because they would become everything.
Right.
Costumes, forts, hats.
Right.
Structures to then would play with little people or other things. That was a huge component of the kind of unstructured play in my house. Was all about tape and paper plates or a stapler. Oh my goodness, a stapler, yeah.
All the things it can do,
oh,
right?
So many things. So many things. Yeah.
And that actually reminds me, if you're looking for resources, definitely look into loose parts play. We're really fortunate here in Rhode Island. If you are local, the Providence Children's Museum actually very consciously chooses to have loose parts available. A lot of museums you go throughout the country, everything's sort of like attached, right? So like you can use this hammer, but it's attached on a string. And there's certainly a method to that madness. Things, disappear, and whatever the case may be, they wander. The experience coordinators over the museum do a lot of collecting and moving, but the fact that like there are scarves you can put in the tube, and there are pegs you can put in the light, bin, and that you can go upstairs and you can be able to use, a hammer in a fort building scenario. So, definitely when you're, as a parent, put on your little cap when you go out and you see something, like, wow, are there loose parts around? And if you're not sure really what I mean by that, all that really means is that there are like, the things are available and they can be moved in any way you want. So like you were saying, paper plates became everything, right? And cups can become anything. So the thing.
I love the Providence. It was probably I liked it even better when the kids were little than even the Boston Children's Museum,
right?
Because there's so much in there, and there's so many great little areas to play, and they're constantly changing things up. I'm sure it's different.
They
since
are.
I've been there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I worked there for about a year and doing outreach in some of the areas that I used to actually work in, and then also doing programming within the museum for school-age kids. And my partner, who did early childhood programming, we were just constantly talking about like, what could we, offer as a program? What could we do to challenge kids in a new way? How could we provide parents with that opportunity to take things home with them? And parents really seem to enjoy that experience.
Yeah.
And they are always very
so many
conscious
hours
about it, right?
So many hours in that museum.
Yeah. So if you're not local, look.
Yes.
Because
There's
sometimes
always
it's
children's
not like
museums,
the big children's
Right.
museum. It may not be that big children's museum. It might actually be a smaller play space that's attached to a different, maybe a living history museum, right?
Yeah.
Where they can dress in costume and cook. So like look for those opportunities when you're out, and when you find a gem, share that with the people
Share it.
you. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, all right. So we talked about, we
So
just
much.
like naturally just talking about all the things. It's great. So we've hit a little bit about asking good questions and not being too helpful. And this is a theme that we've talked about a few times with our Let's Play community. It is it's something you have to learn how to do, because sometimes you have to engage. Someone's going to get hurt. But like
safety is always the threshold, right?
Exactly.
That's your threshold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, what makes a good kind of observational question that what should you be thinking about as a parent as you're trying to help by not helping?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying. And I will say
it's not easy. It's not always like the natural thing.
It's not.
You know.
And the first thing I would say about that is like be forgiving to yourself. You're gonna get it wrong.
Yeah.
And like listen, nobody's going to need a therapy fund because you got it wrong. It's
well,
okay.
they might, but they're going to need it anyway.
But they need it anyway, right? Like, that's a whole nother matter. I started that when she was born.
Yeah.
Here's your therapy fund.
Yes.
I'm going to make mistakes. But our children seeing us make mistakes and correct ourselves is actually a really important part of the growth mindset, and them really learning that that's okay, right? So, like, you asking a question and then realizing maybe the question should have been reframed a different way, and saying, oh, I'd like to actually change how I said that, is an important part of them seeing us learn, right? So don't worry if you get it wrong. A good question makes a observation without imposing your worldview. So when we actually talked earlier about, you know, your perspective as an individual, right? We all come from that. So I'm sure we've all had this. I know I've had this many a time where you're like, oh, I love your dolphin. It was not a dolphin. Like, right? And like, that kid might be 3 and like looks at you like,
yeah.
That is, you know, Thor on his hammer, right? Like, right? So rather than saying, you know, I like your dolphin, which is me deciding what's happening here, it's more of something like, wow, I see you used so much color in this picture. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, what's the story?
Yeah.
And kids have these amazing, delicious, creative minds, right? And the stories are so much more interesting than anything we sort of imposed upon that. So while the picture example is certainly true, I try to do that if, you know, kids are fort building. I don't say, oh, is that a cannon? I say, oh, I see that these structures here are sticking out. Tell me more about that, right? So find 100 different ways to say, talk to me, right? And if communication is something that your kid struggles with, or that level of interaction is a challenge for them, and that's certainly true, giving them sort of a structure or a venue around that. So like, many kids might be okay if you sort of poked in occasionally and said, tell me more about that, or like, what's happening here? You never want to do that when like the magic's happening, right? If they're like,
Right.
then just be quiet, right? But if they're like sort of paused, that's a great time to say, tell me more about it. On the other hand, if you say, tell me more about it, and they like grunt at you or like really upset that you're like intruding, back off. And then like maybe over dinner or before bedtime, maybe, you know, every day you're like, tell me something cool that you created today, or tell me something, you know, that you're really proud of having made, and really let them lead that conversation. And also true if they were struggling, you know, it's like watching our kids struggle is one of the hardest things as a parent, you know, having been a youth worker and watching other people's kids struggle. I had a whole newfound appreciation when my daughter reached the age that she was struggling, and you want to fix it. But the struggle builds the resilience, and it is an important part of their experience. And then the parenting, you know, which is like what we're doing now, as opposed to like our parents being like, great, you went outside and I didn't ask you anything when you came in, right? Like, because we're actively parenting now, in a very different way. So having that opportunity to be like, yeah, I saw that you were red in the face, or, you know, and I try not to even impose an actual emotion on it, which is tricky. I definitely fail on that a lot. I'll be like, you looked really frustrated.
Right.
My daughter, of course, will say, I was not frustrated. I was actually, and she'll clarify for me, but as they build this language, they can clarify for you. I wasn't frustrated. I was overwhelmed because there were too many pieces and the space wasn't big enough. And you gain a new appreciation for where they were in their struggle and how they can help themselves. Because there will come a point where they will all be those college kids, right? Or those, you know, post-teenagers who need to figure it out on their own.
Right.
And we want them to have those skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So talk more, because we're kind of at the end.
Okay.
So talk about what you're working on now as a youth champion.
Okay.
And what that looks like and how that's different.
So I think, when I started out working with kids, really just met this sort of nurturing need I had. I wanted every kid to have a positive adult in their life. I wanted to be that positive adult. I certainly still want that, but now I really want an opportunity to give kids an ability to find their voice. I found as an adult that I just really didn't have the opportunities I wish I had to hone, my own truth. Much of my truth is very related to social activism and to external oppression. So, I know that I've sort of built my way toward this place, and my poetry, which is something I've been writing pretty actively lately, is one of the places that I started to build that voice. And now I'm using that as a platform to help people build their voice as well. So the poetry I'm doing, I do write poetry on my own, but I actually have my Facebook page where I post prompts. Like, we have Moody Mondays. So on Monday, you just tell me your mood, and I write you a poem. So you're like, and I'm like, okay. And I try to epitomize what feels like to me, and then I post the poem, and you get to see it later. So it's a little fun opportunity to really build community, but also to help people build their voice.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to really do that in my classes as well. I'm doing an interactive poetry class with kids coming up this fall that I'm really looking forward to. And just, again, open-ended opportunities, so when they walk in having a word wall where they can move all the words around and create a poem. Having an opportunity where they can work together and use have 3 kids, each of them tells their mood. Now build a poem from those 3 moods. Like, how do we, what if you're excited and I'm sad? How do we bridge those feelings together? And then, sometimes it's just random words. So on Fridays, I do Free Word Fridays. So it's whatever word you want to. So sometimes my friends will be like, well, I was just reading an article, so curmudgeon is your word, and I'm like, but
Friends like to challenge you.
They do, and I think that's a good thing. And I think that it expands our opportunity. It certainly expands my opportunity as an artist, but also I think encourages other people to start participating in having their own voice, and certainly then relates back to the work with kids and really building a sense of self-determination and self-expression. Which I think is something also that has become really challenging in a world where we're being watched all the time, right? We didn't grow up with that. If we'd had Facebook when I was a kid, oh my, what a mess, right? So these kids are really having a real-time experience, but that real-time experience is being viewed through a bubble.
Yes.
And so I think building a child's voice and sense of self, so that they know, even if they misstep, right, or they move in a direction that isn't truly them, they know where to come back to, right? They can find that place despite all the media and technology.
Yeah. Well, tell people about where they can find you and find your work.
So I'm on Instagram, and it's at Sunny Moriello Flats, and I'll spell that for you. Actually,
I will put it in the comments.
Perfect.
Yes,
there you go. It will be there, because Moriello is the blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I'm actually working on a website, and it will be www.sunnymorielloflats.com.
Awesome.
But that's still in the works because, technology and writing and doing all the other things.
Yes.
So those are the places you can find me.
Renaissance woman.
Right?
Yes.
And once you find me there, you can find me all the other places.
Great.
So.
Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.
Coming and chatting with our community and me, and I love every moment I get to spend with you. You're somebody that nurtures my soul, so I so appreciate that you took the time and chatted with us.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Awesome.
I was enjoyed. This is I could talk about this for hours.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, if any of you want to chat, feel free to hit me up on the feeds, and I'll be happy to respond.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next week. If you're listening to this on podcast, please rate our podcast and tell us how you liked it. Stop by and see if Mastermind is going through all kinds of changes, and we'll have new stuff
Excited.
and exciting stuff going on this fall. So check us out. All right. Thanks
Thank
again.
you.
All right.